It's beginning, and now we're recording.
It's just like Radio 4 humour then.
Exactly. So just before we begin, this is a new series of talks called Head to Head. It's an interview series really where I interview public figures, and the best thing about it is that if you don't like my questions, you get to ask your own questions. Please don't be shy, because the whole point of this is the exchange of ideas in the public space, and it's really important that you all get involved. Peter Hitchens, as you can see, is sitting on my right, but he's on your left. And it's up to you over the evening to decide exactly where on the political spectrum you want to locate him. He's an award-winning journalist and an author of 6 books, including The Rage Against God and The Abolition of Britain. He won the Orwell Prize in Political Journalism in 2010, having been shortlisted in both 2007 and 2009. He worked for many years for the Daily Express as a foreign correspondent before joining the Mail on Sunday. Any Mail on Sunday readers in here? A few. We didn't think that the metropolitan audience would necessarily be Peter's natural constituency. He's been a foreign correspondent working in apartheid South Africa, Somalia, Gaza, Iraq, North Korea, undercover from Iran, and he was in Romania when the communist leader Ceausescu was shot dead in December 1989. I remember it vividly, the whole event being played out live on Radio 4. You may well have watched him taking on opponents in combustible style on the BBC's Question Time and Newsnight. He's even had a run-in or two with the comedian Russell Brand, and I interviewed him myself for my BBC 5 Minutes With series. When he introduces a tweet, he starts off by saying, "The hated Peter Hitchens says," which should give you an idea of his idea of what people think of him. The big question is, though, what do you think of Peter Hitchens, and what do you think of his views? Many would describe him as extremely right-wing. He describes himself as a Burkean conservative, and more on that later. He started out on the hard left, a Trotskyist no less, before making a political journey in the opposite direction. He's been a member of both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, though not at the same time, and he's deserted both. He has also moved from atheism to Christianity and laments what he sees as the secularisation and moral decline of this country. It's been said of him that the old revolutionary socialist has lost nothing of the passion and indignation as the years have passed us all by. It's merely the convictions that have changed, not the fervour and fanaticism with which they continue to be held. In a blog published on the Mail's website only yesterday, he encouraged the youth of Britain, I can see some of you here today, to emigrate. He wrote that he felt in general his impact on national life, given the tremendous pulpit he possesses, his words, not mine, is rather disappointing. His main defeat, as he sees it, is his failure to get across the simple fact that the left's chief aims are now moral, cultural and sexual, nothing to do with state ownership and very little to do with trade unions or the working class, which, he says, has more or less ceased to exist in advanced countries. Now, I'll try not to give him too easy a ride, but as I say, the great thing about tonight is if you don't like my questions, there'll be plenty of opportunity to ask your own. I'll divide the event into a series of sections with questions from me followed by questions from you. So let's begin. Peter, what do you think people think of you, and do you care?
I don't care much, because they're usually wrong. It's a problem with being a person of strong opinions and some sort of public persona, that people will fix on you what they want to fix on you. So some of the people who imagine themselves to be my keen enthusiasts are actually quite shocked when I turn to them and say, "Will you please stop voting for the Conservative Party, and that the Conservative Party should be rammed down the U-bend so far that you can then jump on the soles of its feet." And then again, people who are hostile to me are quite shocked when they discover also that I hate the Conservative Party and that I was against the Iraq War and that I'm in favour of getting rid of Trident and a number of other things. So I confuse people, and what people generally do when they're confused is they deceive themselves and they convince themselves that things are other than they are. So I get fixed upon me both by supporters and by enemies, ideas which I don't hold. So it'd be silly of me to care about it, really, wouldn't it?
We're going to come back to why you would like to destroy the Conservative Party and why, in some ways, you think
it's about that for hours.
You already think it's disintegrated. But first, do you believe everything that you've written, Do you sometimes exaggerate? Because after all, you do make a living out of being a polemicist and by provoking debate.
I make a living out of being a newspaper reporter. That's what I started as
You're
being.
a columnist.
Yes, I know, but there are many some columnists, I name no names here, but you might be able to identify, are sort of invented by newspapers who need a columnist who is something or other. They're plucked from other spheres of life and they're given columns. That's not what happened to me. I was a newspaper reporter for many, many decades, and I became a columnist by a series of stages. In fact, the first time I developed a relationship with readers was when, this was in the days when the Daily Express was a newspaper, and when I was its Moscow correspondent.
What do you call it now?
It's not fit for a middle-class, educated, polite audience, what I would call it now. The politest expression for it is a ghost brand, like Capstan full-strength cigarettes, something which still can be sold to a few people, but which won't necessarily do them any good and is not worth promoting with any great vigour. But it was, when I joined the Daily Express in 1977, it was a broadsheet newspaper selling 2.3 million copies a day, which gives you an idea of how things have changed. But when I was its Moscow correspondent and began to write, and it was a brilliant idea of my then editor Nick Lloyd, that rather than just writing what purported to be news from Moscow, which is very difficult to do anyway, I should write about what it was like to live there and to go out and seek experiences, like what it was like to buy a drink in a Russian beer bar, and what it was like to travel on the trolley buses and the metro, and details of life. And it was during that time of writing about life in the Soviet Union, as it then was, that I began to develop this two-way relationship with readers who were interested in what I wrote to me, began to see me as a human being. And from that beginning came eventually the writing about domestic affairs.
But is there a pressure?
I spend a lot of my week on the phone to government departments or other places, finding things out. I'm still a reporter.
But is there a pressure
my column contains a lot of reporting.
Is there a pressure to harden your stances because you have to write something new every week?
No.
And is that what they pay you?
No. The idea that the world needs any spicing up to be made to look any more ludicrous than it is absurd. It is already. I used as a child to read the wonderful columns of Peter Simple in the Daily Telegraph about Bishop Spacely, Trellis and J. Bonington Jagworth and Dr. Heinz Kiosk, the all-purpose psychiatrist. All these people have come true. The ludicrous world of nonsensical, mad people created by Peter Simple in the 1950s and 1960s now actually exists all around us. And all you need to do is describe it with perfect, sober, factual accuracy. And people will say to you, aren't you exaggerating for effect? And I say, absolutely not. It is just like that. In fact, it's probably worse than that. You don't know how much worse it is because nobody's found out yet, but you will.
I'm going to interrupt. Are you finished? To say, to give a bit of context for the evening, I want to know, because it still fascinates me, and we didn't have time in our 5-minute interview to get there, how you made your journey from being a Trotskyist leftist to, in some ways, some would argue, being on the right of the Tory party, certainly on the right of David Cameron's Tory party, in the old sense of the word right. You've said that you didn't change, the facts changed. Well, what has changed about the facts?
No, what I would say about that is that it's extremely tedious. It has been a feature of human existence since the Greeks that young men are radicals and old men are conservatives. And I've simply done what everybody has done throughout history until the late 20th century, when young men were radicals and middle-aged men are radicals, and indeed old men are radicals, wear jeans and go to Rolling Stones concerts. And we have this ridiculous state of affairs in which people simply do not grow up. And most of my generation, in my view, have not grown up. They remain permanently adolescent. And the music they listen to, the views they hold, the drugs they take, the ways in which they live are fundamentally childish.
So you're saying that a lot of people in this room are not grown up?
Well, I don't know. I don't know any of these people, so I wouldn't. But I do think
but assuming they're not,
it's a characteristic of my own generation that they have not grown up, and they've had no reason to. They've had no. And one of my great good fortunes has been that I have had a lot of experiences of the world, not all of them nice. I've lived in places where most people would choose not to live, and travel to places where most people would not choose to go. and experience things that most people would not choose to experience. And so I've had an opportunity to be more grown up than they have, but the fact remains that my view of most of my generation is that they are permanently adolescent.
We've got to get very quickly onto your views, but talking about places to go and not very nice places to go, you don't think this is a very nice country to live in?
It's a wonderful country to live in. If you're someone like me, it's a wonderful country.
Well, let me ask you this. You said yesterday...
I had a great time.
You said yesterday, as I've already intimated, that you encouraged the youth of Britain to emigrate, ending your piece on the Mail blog by saying that you really, really mean it. Well, where should they emigrate to?
No, the point about immigration is that you leave. If you want to push me on where I'd choose to go, if I were 30, I'd go to Canada like a shot.
Why?
It's because it's nice. But I don't.
But you're making a serious political point.
The main thing about immigration is that it's a recognition that whatever criticisms you have, whatever things you'd like to change about your country, however bad it is, there's nothing you can do about it. You're no longer being allowed to take responsibility for the government and nature and arrangements in your country. So therefore, if you don't like them, you're either going to have to submit to things that you don't like, or you're going to have to go. And given that the pound sterling can't conceivably maintain its current rate on foreign exchanges for much longer, the time to go is now. And I don't think arithmetically there's any doubt about that. Lots of people are doing it. I mean, if people ask me for advice on what to do, and they say, what should we do about this country? I say, well, the last general election, I really, really tried. I said to everybody who read my column, I said, whatever you do, you must not under any circumstances vote for the Conservative Party. The one thing that you mustn't do is that, because you can't, in this country, you can't sack the government, you get the same government whoever you vote for. But this is a unique opportunity to sack the opposition. And the response of my readers was fury. They were enraged with this. They had some bizarre idea that David Cameron was a secret Conservative and would rip off his clothes like Superman after the election and reveal himself to be a Conservative, which was obviously...
Well, so let's get on to the heart of it. So what is it that you don't like about... What is it that you don't like about the Conservative Party, Peter? What is it that you don't like about the Conservative Party? Give me 3 examples.
That's quick in the list of things I like.
No, well, give me 3 examples of what you don't like. Well, give me 3 examples.
3 examples?
3 leading examples, 3 priorities that you think they've got wrong. See, it's harder, isn't it? It's harder.
No, it's not.
It's
not hard. I just have to go back so many squares down the game of snakes and ladders to the point where one still cares.
Well, I'll give you time to think. Because isn't it rather comfortable to sit on the sidelines, lamenting the decline of the country and the dissolution of a moral society?
What are these sidelines? I would love to be in parliamentary politics. People like me are completely debarred from parliamentary politics because the MPs in this country are not selected by the electorate. The electorate is given pre-selected people who've been selected by the political parties, which are tightly organised and which exclude anybody who has any ideas of any originality from being considered for election. And then at elections they vote tribally.
So why don't you step off the sidelines and stand? Why don't you stand? I know.
Because none of the parties would let me stand in a safe seat.
So what would the...
And even if I could manage to get through that and pretend not to be myself and even one member of Parliament in a house of more than 600 people can have no effect whatever on the destiny of the country. The only way in which the country can be altered is if there's a political party with which you broadly sympathise, with which you can work and whose work you can take. In a parliamentary system, that's how it works. So anybody with my opinions is debarred automatically from having any influence. It's a great frustration in my life. I can say things and people will come up to me and shake my hand in the street, as they often embarrassingly do, to say how much they agree with me. But and there are quite a lot of people who feel that way, but there is absolutely no point, no sprocket which connects what I say and think with the government of this country. There's nothing that I can
So, Peter, while I give you more time to think of your 3 things you don't like about the Conservative Party...
I can. Let me give you the first and most fundamental one. Any party which is not prepared to commit itself to leaving the European Union is abdicating almost all responsibility for political action of any kind anyway. Because if you don't leave the European Union, then most of what you do will be implementing directives given to you by the European Union rather than acting independently. Until this country is independent, then it doesn't have a government, and it's not independent. It's difficult to calculate just exactly how many of the laws of this country originate in the European Commission, but it's round about 80%. If you put in the statutory instruments by which most of these things are done. Most of them, from the Data Protection Act to the Disability Discrimination Act to the destruction of the post office and the privatisation of the Royal Mail, to the fact that in most parts of the country you now have to separate your rubbish into 3 different bins. These are all things imposed on us by the European Union. You may like them. You may be in favour of privatising the post office. You may believe, for instance, that windmills are a better source of power than coal-fired power stations. But none of these things have been chosen by this country, by its electorate, or by its parliament. They've all been imposed upon it by the European Union. When you have a country whose detailed governance is done from somewhere else, then you cannot claim to be the government when you're there. So the Conservative Party, by refusing to commit itself to departing from the European Union, is, to begin with, cutting itself off from most
I'm going to stop you there.
Most decisions.
Peter, I'm going to stop you there.
So the other ones I could come on to.
Yeah, we come on to those later.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go head-to-head with you on whether we should leave the European Union, because businessmen would make the economic case for staying in better than I would. But
there is no economic case.
But feel free to ask your question, especially any businessmen or businesswomen out there. But I want to move on to moral...
But there is no economic case.
I want to move on to moral and social politics.
Mexico has a better deal with the European Union.
I want to move on to moral and social politics because I think that could get the debate going. You argue in the preface of your book, The Abolition of Britain, that a great civilization, this country, is on the edge of extinction. Sum up your reasons, please, for the assertion that Britain has been in moral decline for years.
Well, I think you can see in a couple of statistics released last week some signs of moral decline. Of course, you have to have a moral position to believe that these are declining. The two that I'm referring to are the persistent figure of 180,000 abortions a year, and the other figure which showed that very soon the number of children born out of wedlock each year would outnumber the number of children born in wedlock each year.
And what do you think the explanation for that is?
Well, the explanation for that is fundamentally that the institution of marriage, which is the constitution of private life, and the basis by which people can govern their own lives and have homes and households and families and private lives not controlled by the state or controlled by corporations, has been severely weakened. It's been deliberately weakened by a series of legal changes.
Let me ask you about homosexuality, and I don't just mean gay marriage. You lent me a copy of your book, The Abolition of Britain, and in the preface to that, you say that you didn't originally include a chapter on homosexuality, which actually couples it together with smokers, comparing the effect that smokers and homosexuals have on their own health. And you said the reason you didn't include it was not censorship, but because you thought that it would cause such an uproar, it would cause such an uproar that the rest of the book would be lost in that uproar. Now, in a chapter called Health Warning, which you were persuaded to leave out for the reasons I've just given, you tiptoed around the idea of being openly homophobic, but the tone of it, I felt, was homophobic. Are you homophobic? And then we'll move on to gay marriage.
What do you mean by homophobic?
You don't like homosexuals and you think that homosexuality shouldn't be legal.
The answer to both of those questions is that no, I don't in any way care what people's private sexual practices are. I think it's in many cases the most uninteresting thing about them. And as for legal, I have since 1966 consistently supported the 1967 Leo Abse Act, which decriminalised homosexual acts between consenting adults in private. And
why the tone for that chapter? Why the tone for that chapter? It's open to everyone to read that chapter.
The tone of the chapter.
You were basically saying that the homosexual act is comparable to smoking, but we're not being told this because it would be politically incorrect.
The comparison was quite simple, and
it was an offensive comparison.
Well, really, I don't see why. The comparison was quite straightforward.
You obviously do see why, because you left it out of the original book, Peter.
Hang on a minute. Let me answer the question, or which I can only do if you let me say more than about 5 syllables before interrupting me. Is that okay?
Go for it.
Right. The point is very simple that I made, which was that the attitude of the authorities towards smoking is that because smoking is undoubtedly bad for you and causes, without any serious doubt, dangerous diseases, the propaganda of the health service and of the government is directed towards discouraging people from smoking. The comparable official attitude towards, and this was written largely before the arrival of antiretroviral drugs, the attitude of authority towards homosexual acts, and acts, of course, are the important thing here, which are likely to lead to contracting HIV, was not the same. And I thought this was extremely interesting, that although both were effectively lifestyle diseases caused by people doing things which they found pleasurable, in one case the government said don't do it, and in the other case the government didn't say don't do it and said all kinds of other rather mealy-mouthed things. And I thought this was a significant and interesting commentary on the attitude of government towards sexual morality. Now, I'd add to that, which this book was written in 1998 and published in 1999, that I removed the chapter because both the agent who was then working for me, who was the only agent who I could find who would work for me, and the publisher who was going to publish the book, who was the only publisher that agent could find after an 18-month struggle to get my book published, both came to me almost on bended knee and said, please, please, will you leave this chapter out? And I said, okay, if you insist. I don't think it matters, but if you insist. And then as soon as it went into paperback, I put it back in again. The other thing that I say about this is that I now believe that the whole argument about homosexuality was a Stalingrad for sexual conservatives. I have, for instance, played no part in and deliberately refused to take any part in the current campaign against same-sex marriage, because I believe it's a diversion. I believe it's a trap into which, an elephant trap into which conservatives repeatedly lumber, into which they're lured on principle, if you believe, as I do, that all sexual acts outside lifelong marriage are wrong, which encompasses an awful lot of
So just repeat that so everyone...
All sexual acts outside lifelong marriage are morally wrong. That's what I believe. And that's... And that, of course, must include a large number of acts which I have myself committed. But that would make it very problematic. So let me just don't take you up on that. This is a complicated point, and I need time.
Right.
I need time to finish it.
Log that point, though, because I'm coming back to it.
If you believe that, then obviously homosexual acts are among the acts which are immoral, but they're a very, very small proportion. The real argument about sexual morality in this country is the argument about marriage, and particularly about the collapse of marriage and the prevalence of divorce, and divorce having become so prevalent, the increasing prevalence also of cohabitation rather than marriage. This is so much more important and affects so many more people. I mean, do you know how many people actually took advantage of the Civil Partnerships Act when it was passed? I think it was 1/2% of the population. It's a diversion.
I answer your question about because it would be dishonest of me not to answer it, because I wrote the book and said what I said. But my position now is that, quite honestly, when asked about homosexuality in any public place, I say I don't care. It's not the point. But, okay, let me come back to you then. Let me come back to you on that, because I'm afraid that's an unsatisfactory position. The logical conclusion, intellectually, the logical conclusion of what you've said about the immorality of sexual acts outside marriage is that unless you have gay marriage, you can't be a homosexual, or at least you can't act out being a homosexual. So do you believe in gay marriage?
Do I believe? No, I don't. I don't actually think that there is any other kind of marriage than heterosexual marriage.
So it's bad luck if you're gay.
It's a technical point. Well, you can't. No, indeed, you could say that. But on the other hand, it's not an argument that I engage in because I just don't care about it. It's the point in this country will soon be reached where the only people who want to be married are lesbian clergymen. One of them will probably be the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the other one will be the Archbishop of York. Nobody else will be married in the whole country, and the fact that they are lesbians, or indeed clergymen, will not be the point. The point will be that nobody else is married, and there are no heterosexual people who are married at all. That's what matters.
Those are the pragmatics, and I think that
it is pragmatic.
It's an unlikely scenario, but you're famous for your principles.
Yeah, but that's why I've answered your question.
You've made it very clear. So I think this is a point where we can go first stage to you guys to ask a few questions so that you don't forget the questions I hope you've been thinking about, and then we'll move on to other things like immigration, and we'll go back to religion, which we touched on there. I imagine religion is why you think they're immoral acts. So please, guys, be brave and someone stick a hand up and ask Peter a question.
Because that is the position of the Christian religion to which I subscribe. That's what I think.
How do you pick and choose, Peter, for your Christianity? Or are you an absolutist? Are you a literalist? Everything in the Bible, do you take that up?
No. The Bible is not a Christian Quran. And the name Bible means library, and it contains prophecy, poetry, history, polemic, all kinds of things, and all of them have to be read differently. My guide to what parts of it I take in different ways is the Church of England 1662 Book of Common Prayer.
Do you not find a contradiction or a difficulty in your position that on the one hand you are religious with a lot of religiously informed moral views, on the other hand I think you probably describe yourself as a defender of civil liberties? Yeah. Isn't that a difficult clash when you take, for example, gay marriage?
No, the point about morality is that it's for you. The only person to whom you can give moral instruction is yourself. The point where morality intersects with politics is where governments do things which encourage people to do immoral acts. And where governments do that, which I believe currently they do a great deal, then I believe that one should oppose them. I think the secret of good government is to let men alone as much as possible. And that's the ideal society. It's not a utopian one, but an attainable one, is one where people's lives are governed as much as possible by conscience, and government needs to intervene as little as possible. But the laws are there for those moments when conscience fails, as we all know that it does, and where the state has to intervene to protect others from those whose consciences tell them that it's all right for them to rob and steal and rape and defraud, whereupon law becomes very important. And there is an argument, and we'll come onto it in a discussion we have about drugs, there is an argument which is that crime is caused by law. It is. There would be no crime if there were no law, but then you have the question as to why you should have laws on various things. But morality is for you. If you have a morality, you should follow it.
Can you have morality and a realistic moral code without religion?
Yes, but I believe it would be fundamentally unsatisfactory.
Why?
Well, first of all, because of human dishonesty. The easiest example of this is office politics. The smiler with the knife. The man who appears to be, to everybody, kind, well-intentioned, generous, and thoughtful, but who behind your back is doing you in. The golden rule has always seemed to me to be a profoundly inadequate and second-class form of morality, because do as you would be done by actually operates as do as you would like people to think you want to be done by, while secretly getting on with the things that you really want to do. All of us, I think, if we're honest with ourselves, know that in secret and where we don't think we're being discovered, we will do things we oughtn't to do. And unless there is a recognition of conscience, and also a recognition that there is ultimately a justice which you cannot influence and from which you cannot conceal yourself, then morality will be second rate. Of course you can construct a morality without religion. The thing is, it will not be anything like as good as the morality you can construct with one.
Your brother, Christopher Hitchens, who sadly passed away in December of last year, and I'm sure some of you will have questions about your relationship with your brother.
Year before last, actually.
Year before. Was it the year before?
2011.
When debating with you, he described religions as a totalitarian regime that subjects you to round-the-clock surveillance, a celestial North Korea. Is it exhausting being constantly monitored, having no privacy, so every immoral thought that you have is being listened in on?
Well, you can portray it like that if you like.
Does it feel like that?
Not to me. No. I've been to North Korea.
Can you hear at the back, everyone?
Can you hear? Sorry, I'm going to do shout if you can't. I've been to North Korea, and North Korea is very different from the Church of England.
I think you understand this analogy, though.
I understand what he's saying,
Do you have a truly private sphere?
intention? I just think that it's Cobblers, does it?
I want you guys to ask a couple more questions, because the first question came from my dad, so that's cheating. Yes.
You say that without law there'd be no crime. Most of what we perceive...
Sorry, I say what?
We've got a microphone there, sorry.
You say most crime exists because of law.
No, I don't say most crime is because of law. I say all crime is because of law, because without law it wouldn't be crime, would it?
Entirely. Most crime that we perceive exists because of Christianity and other religions. It's not law, it's religion that we can get rid of.
When I say, you may have blundered here a bit, I'll try and explain why. When I say that it's true in a way that all crime is caused by law, I don't mean that people commit crimes because there are laws against them. I mean that they are defined as crimes because the law says they're crimes. The actions themselves, if you will let me complete the point, the actions themselves become crimes when the law defines them as crimes. People will still do them. If a society decides that it's going to define them as crimes and punish them, then things change. And actually, if it punishes them seriously in a deterrent fashion, then they become less common.
Not sure does that answer your question? And what do you say to the charge that religion is behind a huge amount of the wars that we've had over human history?
It's not true. The use of religion as a pretext for doing wrong things is, of course, a characteristic of humanity. Humanity will always see pretext for what it does. In fact, even if you examine the 30 Years' War, which I, in my book, The Rage Against God, incorrectly conceded was effectively a war of religion. In fact, when you look at it in detail, it doesn't work out that way. People were not really fighting about religion, they were fighting about power. And in Northern Ireland, for instance, where it's frequently said that the conflict there is caused by religion, it's not caused by religion, it's caused by what would in other parts of the world be described as ethnic conflict. And religion is a pretext for it. There's nothing in religious precepts which allows people to kill others because they disagree with them about the real presence of Christ. And I doubt very much whether either the Provisional IRA or the UFF had much concern about the real presence of Christ or any of the other doctrinal conflicts between Protestantism and Catholicism when they were doing their murders. That's not what it was about.
Ironically, Peter, you do think that Christianity's involvement in the First World War had a huge role to play in the secularization of this country. You think that we shouldn't have gone to war in 1914, and the fact that religious authorities or religious powers backed that war, and at the end of it, after all the killing, people took a step back from that religious authority. Do you still stand by that?
Oh, completely, yes. I think that the churches, largely, and there were some exceptions, but the churches largely discredited themselves by their support for that war. And they then, sort of, because at the end of the war people realised what had really happened and what they'd been asked to do and how their deepest instincts for good had been manipulated for wrong reasons, and that's putting it lightly, that they turned on all the institutions, whether political or religious or legal or educational, which had supported it, and re-examined them with a very cold eye. And I don't think the Christian religion in Europe ever recovered from that war. I think the secularization of Europe is a direct consequence of the 1914 war, which I regard as, and I hope that in next year when we commemorate the centenary of it, regard as one of the most catastrophic events in human history, comparable with the collapse of the Roman Empire.
You said also that the Suez crisis and the Profumo affair undermined Christian authority in this country.
I don't know about Christian authority. They certainly undermined authority because they made all aspects of authority look foolish and dishonest. And I think that after Suez, the authority of the police constable, the teacher in the classroom, the vicar, everybody associated with authority in this country was diminished because the government had been shown to be dishonest and incompetent. and that the deep results of that in this country still persist as well.
One
of the reasons why we ran squealing into the arms of the European Union.
Before Peter, we take more questions from the audience. Just very quickly, you're against the First World War, you're against the Iraq War. Can you give us an example of a war that you think was justly fought?
It's a difficult one. I'm sure one will come along eventually. It's possible. It's very, very hard.
Second World War?
Well, the Second World War is a huge and complicated subject, which if you want to get into it, we'll have a row if you want to get into it.
Just very quickly, should we have gone to war with Hitler?
Well, possibly, but certainly not when we did, for the reason that we did, under the circumstances that we did. It always seems to me to be tremendously unwise to engage in a major European war when you don't have an army.
More questions, I saw more hands up.
You mentioned earlier about position.
Should we just give you the microphone? Have you got it? Sorry, and then we'll come to you.
You mentioned earlier that there's no point someone you going into British politics, but doesn't the recent success of the UK give you the encouragement that there might be some space to do in British politics?
Negative encouragement. Questions about UKIP? And UKIP is Dad's army. It's the blazer and cravat belt of Britain in arms. And it's also the Conservative Party in exile. It doesn't have a coherent position. Its leader, for instance, has mused in public about decriminalising drugs, a policy which I find so revolting that I wouldn't want to be in the same room as someone who supported it, let alone support a party that...
You've managed it rather effectively, though.
Sorry?
You've managed it rather effectively in the past.
What?
Being in the same room as people who support it.
I wouldn't want to be in the same room. I didn't say I wouldn't be. I said I wouldn't want to be. So I quite often go in the same room as people I don't want to be in the same room as, but it's usually quite clear fairly early on that I feel that way. So
can we take a core tenet of UKIP policy, which is immigration, and then we'll have more questions. I'm a product of immigration. I'm sure there are a lot of people in this room who are products of immigration. Do you think we've had too much immigration?
Enormously too much immigration, yes.
Why?
Well, because it's been, first of all, because it was deliberately contrived to change the country.
By who?
By the last Labour government. We have, as evidence for this, to me it's obvious. When I was on the extreme left, we were very keen on immigration. Not because we liked immigrants. We didn't particularly like them, but because we hated Britain. And we saw large-scale immigration as a very good way of changing the country from the sort of place that it was, a largely conservative, very unrevolutionary place, into a denatured, decultured, directionless place in which people like us could get our way. And I tend to think that a lot of my former comrades still feel that way. And indeed, New Labour was, and it still makes me almost choke with rage when I hear Conservatives saying that, oh, that's Tony Blair, the best Tory Prime Minister we ever had. New Labour was devised by Marxists. The principal ideology of New Labour came out of Euro-communism and the magazine Marxism Today. New Labour's front bench and indeed back benches were stuffed with people who had been comrades in various Marxist organisations in the 60s and 70s, and who, unlike me, will never talk about it and get very embarrassed when it's mentioned. And the reason why they won't talk about it and they get embarrassed is it's still important. They said to themselves that here was an opportunity to change the country. There is one piece of direct evidence for this, which is an extraordinary article by a man called Andrew Nether, spelled Neather. Google it, look at the article, and he actually says quite clearly, he was a speechwriter for Barbara Roach, who was one of the ministers centrally concerned, that this was the intention of New Labour, to change the country, and also, as he put it, to rub the right's nose in diversity. It was a deliberate policy, and the scale of the immigration which was contrived during that period was greater than anything this country has experienced since the arrival of Hengist and Horsa in, when was it, 670 AD. It is absolutely enormous. None of the other immigrations which people refer to, the Jewish immigration of the Edwardian period, the Huguenots, nothing, or the post-Windrush immigration for the Commonwealth, the Ugandan and Kenyan nations, nothing remotely compares with the scale of that immigration. Anybody in the United States will tell you, who's an expert in this, that one of the key things about immigration is that if it proceeds at a rate where it's impossible to achieve absorption of the immigrants, to get them to learn the language, to integrate in society, then rather than the immigrants being changed into British people by the society to which they have come, because after all they presumably come to it because they like it here and they want it to be the way it was when they arrived, rather than the society changing them into British people, they change the society into something which is no longer British. And that is what this scale of immigration has undoubtedly done. The change in the areas where it has been most powerful has been huge. It's also very, very bad for poor people. Because some of you may remember the huge arguments that were had about the minimum wage during the pre-1997 period when Labour put it in its manifesto. Why has the minimum wage not risen substantially since 1997? The reason is because mass immigration has provided a large pool of labour which has enabled employers to keep it down, has forced wages down for unskilled people or indeed skilled people seeking work in areas where there is high immigration. But it has provided large numbers of nannies for and other servants for the bourgeois bohemians who infest the upper reaches of the Labour and Conservative parties, and it has also provided lots of cheap restaurants for them. So it must be good.
Let's step away quickly from poverty. Very quickly, you mentioned Britishness. A, what is Britishness, and B, why does it matter if we become less British?
Well, Britishness to me is, amongst other things, a very strong respect for the rule of law. In fact, probably that is the most profound part of our culture, and interestingly, one of the things which is most threatened by our members of the European Union, which is to impose a continental legal norms on this country which are entirely different from our own. I'll stick at that. What I've visited in my life, I think 57 different countries, which is, I think, only about a quarter of the available number, but it's quite a few, and seen some pretty horrible ones. And what the conclusion I've come to is that the two things which make a society most likely to be viable and civilized are liberty of the subject and the rule of law. And these are the things which we have in this country have both valued and cherished, and which are part of our culture, and which many of the people who come here don't even understand as concepts, let alone support. So to invite into your country large numbers of people who do not abide by your fundamental views, don't share your view of law, don't share your sense of humour, don't speak your language, is to alter that society.
But Peter, very quickly, my grandparents were refugees, they came to this country. I have a very strong sense of the rule of law, and I obey the law, I hope. So after a period of time, surely immigrants will have that rub off on them. The idea that a relatively tiny proportion of this country who are immigrants are going to influence the host country against abiding by the rule of law and respecting it strikes me as strange.
Well, that's because you weren't listening to what I said earlier, which is that the numbers of immigrants in this current wave are so large that the possibility of absorption, which your family went through, is almost non-existent. Go to, as I did, to Boston and Lincolnshire, where the scale of it is colossal, and you will see that there is no possibility of these people being absorbed. What's happened, as has also happened in a number of the Pennine towns where the immigration from Asia has been very large, is the creation of solitudes with their backs turned upon each other. Where there is no integration, there's no communication between the groups.
We've got more questions. Do you want to challenge? I haven't forgotten you. Sorry, I haven't forgotten you.
What I don't understand is that you say that the most important things to you are rule of law and respect for individual liberty. And that suggests to me that so long as you obey the law, the state should pretty much leave you alone. That seems completely and totally contradictory to your moral position, which seeks to impose its own moral values on anyone that doesn't abide by your own definition of moral behaviour. So if you take the sexual example, for instance, lots of people in this country commit sexual acts outside marriage. That's not against the law, it's usually a private matter. and yet you turn that to be an immoral act. That's an evasion of the very liberty that you also did.
Well, once again, you don't appear to be listening to what I was saying. I said emphatically and several times that morality is for you, or for me. I don't propose to impose morality by law, and have never said so. So the contradiction which you have imagined doesn't exist. I don't have it. My view of government policy and morality is that governments should not pursue policies which make it hard for people to act in a moral fashion.
There's a man over there who had his hand up.
Sorry, this is sort of linked to what the man before said. But earlier you were talking about morality and when it's not personal. And you said you have morality that's personal, and then it ceases to be personal when a political body starts to do immoral things. But it almost seems like there seems to be a bit of missing where it becomes immoral. You have your.
Let me give you. Can I make it simple?
Finish.
An example.
So you say morals are personal, and then they become political when a government does something immoral. But it just seems like you're basing that sort of viewing of that as being immoral on your personal views. I don't know if you get from one to the other.
Well, I'm not sure I understood that, or in fact, I'm sorry, heard it properly. But let me give an example.
Speak up.
Sorry?
Speak up, will you?
Sorry, I'm just trying to recover my thread. I'll say it again. My view of governments and morality is that governments should not do things which encourage people to do immoral acts. So, for instance, I think that the state subsidy of fatherless families, the 1969 Divorce Law Reform Act, which made it easier to get out of marriage than to get out of the car leasing agreement, are wrong actions by government because they encourage people to do things which are moral, and they discourage people from doing things which are moral, and they encourage people to do things which are immoral. I do not propose to make divorce a criminal offence. I do not propose to bring the criminal law into morality.
Why not? And why do you?
Because I don't believe in it, and secondly, because even if I did, it would be helpful.
Isn't this the clash?
It would be. You asked the question, you must wait for the answer, and secondly, because I believe it would be impractical. Law is not. There's absolutely no point in having a huge book full of laws which are unenforced and unenforceable. One of the great problems of the last government, particularly, and of this government too, is a great tendency to pass laws as gestures, as eye-catching initiatives with which the Prime Minister can be personally associated, which look good but which cannot be and will not be enforced, and which make no difference. Laws have to be practically enforceable, and they have to be enforced to do any good. And if they're not enforced, they bring the whole system of law into disrepute.
I just want to make one point, hammer this home, and you don't have to answer it, and then we'll move on to another question.
I do have to answer it.
Well, okay. If you think it's impractical to ban sex outside marriage, I can see that point. But if we go back very briefly to this idea of homosexuality, and you believe the government shouldn't do things that encourage immoral acts, well, the government, by legalising homosexuality, and now by being on the point of legalising gay marriage, surely are doing something that is encouraging what is, in your view, an immoral act. So if you were the Peter Hitchens party, would you outlaw homosexuality?
No, I've told you before that I supported before it was passed, I supported when it was passed, and I've supported since.
You stated your position.
The 1967 Act, which stated specifically that the Homosexual Act between consenting adults in private, no affair of the law, and I think that's a perfectly good position, and I stick at that. If the government, but all the rest of it, I regard it, as I say, as a Stalingrad, a symbolic battle into which you can pour all your resources for years and years and years and years for no result. If you're at all remotely interested in practical politics, you concentrate on the things which are important. frankly, the number of people, I'm perfectly happy for homosexuals to get married in church, provided the law also has a stipulation allowing heterosexuals to get married in gay clubs. I think the take-up on both sides will be quite small. It doesn't matter to me. It's not important. And you can try and tempt me to tumble into this elephant trap any number of times this evening you like. I won't do it.
I think you already have. But let's move on. Let's move on. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question about immigration? You don't have to ask questions about immigration. Ask whatever you want. Should we go there and then there? And then there?
And here.
And there, sorry. Who there?
Hey, I just want to ask about the Tories. You talk about the Tories collapsing if people stop voting for it, but then you also said that most people of your generation are adolescents. So, if most people of your generation are adolescents, who would vote for a new party that replaces the Tories, and wouldn't we just get something equally inane in its place?
I should have been clear about what I meant by my generation. I really mean those of us who infested the plate glass and ancient university campuses in the late 1960s and early 1970s. I didn't mean the people who actually had to work for a living. I meant that the people who, like me, loafed about on grants provided by school dinner ladies and postmen for 3 years being Trotskyists, and then went off to run the BBC and the civil service and the schools and everything else. They're the ones who haven't grown up. There are many, many people of my generation who've had serious experience of life who are quite grown up, who I would hope would, if given the opportunity, given a political party which actually offered them anything remotely like what they wanted, would sweep the country with it. But no such party shows any signs of coming into existence.
Another question. Do you mind if we move on? I haven't had many female questions, but we've got one at the back. Go on.
Just my question. Would you suppose that we are now in a post-Christian Britain, and what, if anything, will do you suppose will fill the space?
We've been in a post-Christian Britain probably since the 1920s. In terms of belief, I think almost certainly the Christian religion died as an internally believed thing in most people's minds in the years after the First World War, but the formal observance continued at a reasonably high level in the status of the church. We're now in what I term the afterglow, that period between the setting of the sun and the falling of the darkness, when we still continue to operate as a society governed by Christian ideas, but the origin of them is no longer accepted. That can't last indefinitely. Once the source of light is gone, then eventually the light goes as well. But the afterglow lasts longer if you're richer. And since most of the people who are in charge of the country are richer, the afterglow is lasting longer for them. And Richard Dawkins lives in North Oxford, for goodness sake. It will take him ages to realise this is a de-Christianised country. If he lived in other parts of Oxford, he could discover it tonight. There's an awful lot of practical atheism going on the rougher housing estates of this country, but it hasn't actually come to the doorsteps of the influential and the wealthy yet, so it's not been widely noticed.
Question at the back.
I can relate to saying that earlier you said that you don't think the state should support fatherless families.
The state?
You said basically that you don't think the state should support fatherless families.
Well, the state, having supported fatherless families for, I think, about 40 years now, it would be quite wrong for it suddenly to stop. If you encourage people into this way of life, then you have to continue supporting them because you've misled them into doing it. And it would be completely wrong to say, right, that's it. All the housing and the benefits stop tomorrow. What you've started, you have to finish. I think it should stop encouraging any more. It should say that from a date, let's say, for the sake of argument, 9 months and 10 days from now, this support will cease. As it doesn't exist in many countries.
Entirely unrealistic.
think all relationships.
Well, it's unrealistic because there is no political party which is capable of articulating. It's not. It's not unrealistic because it's wrong.
So let's just be absolutely clear on that policy.
It's been very successful. The state policy of supporting fatherless families has been fantastically successful. There are a lot of them, which seems to me to suggest that the state intervention on this matter has been quite influential. If the state intervened in a different way, it might be just as effective in the opposite.
Let's just say, for argument's sake, we found a party that could articulate this properly. Let's say it was the Peter Hitchens party. You would say that by 2014, from 2014 onwards, you've had fair warning. If you find yourself in a fatherless family, you will get no state support. Is that your position?
Yeah, and then people have to rely on their families for it. This happens in a number of continental countries, and as a result, the incidence of fatherless families is a lot lower.
We've got a person up here, and then we'll have a person there, and then I will ask a question about the death penalty. And this is sort of very much wait and see, trying to work out the right length for this, because it's the first one. I want to make sure you get value for your money. I know the tickets are expensive. We're not running away with any of it because we've just managed to break even.
Slightly going back to immigration. If you were to overcome your resistance to something like UKIP and accept that no political party is entirely homogenous and that if it was in its early days you could maybe affect it, people always talk about the immigration of the poor. Well, what about the immigration of the rich? In a borough like Kensington, the only borough in London where the population has actually gone down since the last census. You've got a complete distortion of property values and therefore all possibility of community existence by the arrival of the oligarchs and I'm using that as an simplification. And because the pound is down by 25%, they are able to buy our property for 25% cheaper than we are. There are many countries in the world where non-nationals are not allowed to buy freeholds. They're allowed to have leaseholds, they're allowed to spend their life on future generations. What would your view on doing something like that?
Well, I sympathise with a lot of what you say. I think it's amazing how willing we are to sell off this country to people abroad. And for instance, Christian Walmart has rightly pointed out that what was British Railways has now been renationalised, but it belongs to the nationalised railway systems of several other European countries rather than to us. We sell our national assets very willingly abroad, and we allow property ownership which other countries wouldn't. We've abandoned any attempt to maintain national integrity. But alas, I used to see my job as a polemicist, and now I see it as an obituarist. I am writing the obituary of a country which is dead. It's over, it's gone. It's not, these things having happened are not recoverable. The mass immigration which New Labour deliberately created and encouraged, and which is continuing under the current government, has changed the country unalterably. All one can do is hope for the maximum amount of harmony and civilization among the people who live here as a result of it. But the country as it was no longer exists and cannot be recreated, and a lot of things have been lost. That is now where I sit.
Very quickly,
it's gone.
Very quickly, can you name a decade that you would rather live in?
No, it's not. I'm always accused of believing in golden ages and being a nostalgist. This is complete rubbish. I remember the 50s very well. Chilblains, Gristle, Impetigo. It wasn't very nice, and everything was full of cigarette ash. I don't think that there's any point in trying to return to the past. What I always used to say, and I still do say it from a simple point of argument, is that you can only argue about the future, and you can only argue intelligently about the future if you have a proper assessment of the past. But the trouble is that my view of the future now is that we've lost so much that it's irrecoverable. This may be sinfully pessimistic. I may have given up the fight too early, and that other people who are younger than I am might conceivably find grounds for hope and put it right, but at the moment I can't see any, which is why, as I said at the beginning, my advice is to emigrate. And people laugh when I say this, but I'm absolutely not joking.
So Canada.
That's what you should do if you have the chance.
Canada's a great country, but I just want to quickly say, yes, Michael?
Two things here. One, It sounds like you think the country is in much worse shape than it was when you were a boy. This is sentimental or something. And the second thing is, it seems that you think that the family unit is the domain of the church and not the state. And it's the state getting involved, which seems to be creating a problem.
Well, both of those are misconceptions. As I just said, I remember the 50s and I didn't much like them. The country was in a catastrophic state at the time. I didn't realise how bad it was because my parents protected me from a lot of it and because I was a privileged person. I grew up in privileged circumstances. Also, it's taken me a long while because of the pseudo-religion of Winston Churchill in the finest hour in the Second World War. It's taken me a long time to understand that in fact this country lost the war, which had started in 1939, in 1940, and then became the subservient ally of other powers in another war in which we were not a determining participant, and after which we were impoverished and diminished. So no, I don't think that. And no, the point about the church rather than the state being the possessor of the institution of marriage is that it's not that the church is all powerful, but that the state keeps out of it. What the church is doing is it's offering people a chance to voluntarily declare that the constitution of their private life will be governed by certain rather moving and also rather powerful rules, which if they follow will lead in many ways not necessarily to pleasure, but certainly to happiness and to responsibility and to the good life, not the good life as a mass of consumer goods or as being environmentally acceptable, but the good life, that is to say, people pursuing as far as they possibly can those things which they know to be good and beautiful all their lives long. That's what private life should be, and government should intervene in it as little as possible. And where government does intervene in private life, it often makes a mess of it. Government is bad at almost everything it does. As I said many years ago, if you sent the government out to buy you a loaf of bread, it would come back 2 days later with a lump of stale cake and no change. It cannot do anything right, and whatever it intervenes in turns to dust in its hands. So the intervention of government in private life, the nationalisation of childhood, which has taken place particularly, has been catastrophic. But to attach this to some kind of belief that A, I'm nostalgic for my boyhood, and B, that I believe in a theocracy, this is where the hated Peter Hitchens comes in. We laugh in my house about this character who believes all these terrible things.
It's a logical question, though. If you think we're in terminal decline, people want to know, well, what are we in decline from?
Well,
if we're in decline from something, people want to know the period in British history that you would prefer to live in. But I'm going to move this on because we've spoken.
It's not a matter of preferring to live in. The past is dead and cannot be recovered. People who imagine...
Do you think it was better in the past? Okay, you wouldn't prefer to live in the past, but do you think it was better in the past?
I think that we chose the wrong future. We repeatedly chose the wrong future.
I'm going to move this on,
What
Peter.
now could be better than it is what I believe, and the future could be better as well if we would pay more attention to now. But all this discussion of the past and would you like to have lived in the Edwardian era and all this is all round objects. It's of no significance. The question for the purpose of all philosophy, compare what is possible with what exists, and to move towards what is better. Not to ramble on about golden ages in the past and how the trains were nicer in 1914.
I'm going to ask you a question about that.
Undoubtedly were, but that's not the point.
I'm going to ask you a question about the death penalty. A lot of people may have strong views on this. Peter was, I think, the only British journalist who in the mid-1990s went to witness the execution of Nicholas Ingram in the United States. Did that make you more pro the death penalty than you already were, or did it give you doubts? And doesn't the death penalty transform heinous murderers, and no doubt you'll tell us what he did, into victims?
It didn't change my views on the death penalty at all. I felt in a way that since I was living in the United States and had the ability to see this thing, that I should see it. I remember once Charles Wheeler chiding me and saying how disgusting it was that I'd actually attended an execution by electric chair, and I said, well, you go to war zones, and quite rightly so, because although you know it's going to be horrible, you feel it's your job, and to some extent your duty as a reporter, to tell people what the world is really like. This was something I could do, and therefore I did. It was a horrible thing to see. I felt a lot older after it than I did before. There was no pleasure in it, but it was important, it seemed to me, because in some way I might have been said to have willed it, because I believed that the death penalty was the right penalty for certain types of heinous murder, and there's no doubt at all that Nicholas D. Ingram was a heinous murderer. He invaded the house of a couple called J.C. and Mary Sawyer. He tortured them. He then took them out into the forest, and he tied them to a tree, and he jeered at them, and then he shot J.C. Sawyer through the head while his wife was still tied to him in the tree. And then he shot Mary Sawyer in the head, but because J.C. Sawyer was in the process of dying and slipped, and was tied to his wife, who was by then his widow, she moved while Nicholas D. Ingram was shooting him, and the shot only grazed her, but it was such an effusion of blood, and she fainted with shock that he thought she was dead, and as a result she was able to serve as the principal witness against him for the heinous murder which he had committed. It's unusual, actually. You often find that people will go on and on about the execution of various people in the United States or elsewhere. It's unusual for anyone to know the names of their victims, because they are so principally concerned with the murderer.
Isn't that part of the problem?
Well, it's a lot to do with the problem.
But if you didn't have the death penalty, you wouldn't have that problem.
Look,
the transferal of sympathy and empathy.
There is. I don't think anybody who wants to have sympathy with Mr. Ingram is welcome to have it if they want to. He was undoubtedly courageous on the night of the execution. A man who's able to spit when he's 10 minutes from being dead obviously has a lot more guts than I have.
But I
respect that, but I don't. This idea that executing people makes martyrs of them, I don't think washes. I mean, for instance, talking of martyrs, who remembers the names of the IRA terrorists who were hanged on the instruction of Eamon de Valera in Dublin between 1938 and 1940? After which the IRA didn't operate in the Irish Republic for 40 years.
But doesn't Peter the death penalty represent another difficult crux for you, another tension? What happened to Christian redemption?
Well, I think people are much more likely to seek forgiveness for and be penitent about a crime if they're shortly to be hanged than if they're left to go mad in a prison cell or a psychiatric hospital for 30 years. And look at Myra Hindley and Ian Brady. I mean, Hindley at the end so little understood what she'd done that she actually believed she could be released. And well, we know about Ian Brady because of his recent appearance.
What about the state's
these
ability?
People, both of these people would have been better off if they'd had 3 clear Sundays in which to make their peace with God.
What about us as a society and our ability to be redemptive? Don't we strip that away if we kill people?
There's a simple problem with the death penalty. You know, we're all supposed to forgive our enemies, but when you've murdered somebody, the principal victim of your misdeed is not around to forgive you. And I don't believe we're entitled to forgive on behalf of murdered people.
But we're entitled to kill.
Oh, we are. It's fundamentally the just war principle. That is a war which I am prepared to fight, where you know. Unlike those many nice liberal Guardian readers who supported, for instance, the bombing of Belgrade during the Serbian-Kosovo war, on the grounds that it was a liberal war, and were perfectly happy to see innocent people, including the make-up lady at Serbian TV, blown to pieces in collateral damage. Unlike that, in the exercise of the death penalty, the chances are there won't be any collateral damage. You'll just kill the guy who's done the bad thing.
You've written that you think
it's a form of war.
You've written that you think
violence
prison is worse,
sometimes justified.
You've written that you think prison is actually worse. Is actually worse than killing someone.
I've written what?
You've written. You've been quoted as saying that prison, a long prison sentence, is actually worse than the death penalty.
Long prison sentences. I think the idea of sending someone to prison for 30 years is intolerably cruel. And anybody who's been inside a prison and has any sensibility at all wouldn't dream of doing that to a fellow creature. It's much, much kinder to hang them.
Questions? got about 10 more minutes, and then it's end. So if you've got questions, ask them.
Okay, thank you. At one time I would have been opposed to the idea of death penalty, but I'm a lot more open-minded to it now because I happen to think we've got quite a few politicians who I believe should become treason. And
it's a different question.
I'm serious about that because, and this is one of the reasons why I appreciate your work is because you're one of the few people, one of the few journalists speaking in the media who sort of, who doesn't perpetuate all these silly cliches about Labour and Tory and all this super.
It's kind of you, but could you move on to the question?
Sure. I just wanted to get your take on my view that there's basically in this country a Gramscian, cross-party kind of Gramscian revolutionary sect who've been working for a kind of revolutionary change, and talking about top politicians of the three major parties and people who are referred to as culture creators as well.
Okay, well, there's a problem about conspiracy theories. There are conspiracies. I've taken part in some of them. In this country, they're usually called lunch, and involve more often the principal conspiracy, which takes place in London probably 15 or 20 times a week, is a group of journalists from a national newspaper sitting down to lunch with a politician who leaks them a piece of information in a certain form which he wishes to appear in a national newspaper, or probably in 2 or 3 national newspapers at once, in such a way that it will suit a campaign which he is running. And you will also find that there will be an extraordinary thing. You'll notice it if you look carefully at the newspapers and indeed at broadcasting, that an idea will suddenly appear in leader page articles. Panorama will make a programme about it. You hadn't heard about it before, but it suddenly begins to be discussed. These things don't happen by accident, and mostly they begin at lunch. The really conspiratorial events happen at dinner after dark, because people feel less likely to be observed, I think, once it's dark. So there are conspiracies, but they tend to be small and direct. The idea that there's been some kind of general conspiracy is, I think, probably laughable. On the other hand, people are often motivated by ideas they don't know and don't understand. Maynard Keynes said that most politicians, although they claimed not to have any ideology, were usually pursuing policies which had originally been advocated 20 or 30 years before by some defunct economist. Most of the Cameroons in the current cabinet are following policies of the sort which we as international socialists, Marxist-Leninists in the 1970s, were pursuing, and which we understood to be beneficial to our cause. They have no idea that they're doing this. The only member of the current cabinet who has a political brain to rub together is Michael Gove. I think he's probably the only one who can pronounce Antonio Gramsci, for instance, and knows roughly what it's about. But the rest of them are doing it. In the case of New Labour, there are undoubtedly people who had, quite large numbers of people, who had Marxist education and training and were deeply involved in that sort of activity and who understood it. I mentioned Martin Jakes and the Euro-communists and Marxism Today as an example of this. So yes, there is this kind of thought, the idea of the cultural hegemony, the idea that to succeed the radical revolutionary movement had to capture the culture and destroy the influence of religion and conservatism that way, rather than the failed Bolshevik attack, the seizure of the barracks and the post office. That is very common among politicians, but most of them don't know that they're doing it at the time. They're slaves to defunct Marxist-Leninists. That was a phrase that Lenin never actually uttered.
We're moving towards the end. I just want to ask Peter about his brother Christopher, who is a big celebrity in the United States, and with whom you debated publicly at least twice. It's a sort of personal question, so you can choose not to answer it, but you fell out with him, or the press led us to believe that you fell out with him publicly. Were you reconciled by the end? And did you in some sense define yourself against your brother during your career?
He fell out with me. I had no desire to fall out with him. I wanted an argument. He wanted a scene. That is in a way typical of him, bless him. He loved a good scene. He loved to have quarrels with people. He even, this is amazing to me, he even contrived to have a quarrel with probably the nicest and cleverest man that either he or I ever knew, the wonderful poet James Fenton, who he cut off for a while over some argument about the Falkland Islands in the 1980s. He loved to have rows with people, and he decided on this occasion that he would have a row with me. It was a compliment in a way. No, I don't find myself in opposition to him at all. If one went into the history of this, we had completely separate and parallel lives and became bizarrely, vaguely known to a wider public in this country round about the same time. I've never cracked the American market, damn it. And I don't exist there because I don't have any electronic existence there. It was quite funny that in this country there was quite a large group of people, some of them perhaps in West London, some of them in the more exalted regions of the unpopular papers in Fleet Street, or the magazines of the intelligentsia, who knew all about Christopher, who'd never heard of me. And then there were my readers on the popular papers that I worked for who heard of me, and neither group had any idea of the other brother's existence. So there were these two worlds, and then various events took place which led these two worlds to collide in a rather curious way. And you still get people coming onto Twitter saying, I had no idea Peter Hitchens was Chris Hitchens' brother. And I have no doubt there are people who read me who largely don't go onto Twitter, which, as you know, is an electronic left-wing mob, who have no idea that I have a brother called Christopher.
Were you reconciled by the end?
Well, reconciled. I mean, we were on reasonable terms. We were never friends. We were brothers. And those of you, some people, and I envy them immensely. Some people have tremendously close and loving relationships with siblings, and people write to me about this because we're in this league of sort of brothers like the Miliband's and the Gallaghers who've publicly quarrelled. And they write to me about this, and they tell me that some people have had wonderful fraternal relationships, and other people never speak to their brothers and sisters at all. It's a terrifically complicated and difficult relationship, quite different from friendship. Very hard to manage, especially if both of you are, how shall I say, a little bit forceful.
You said you were different people with different lives, you have entirely different pleasures, we live in different continents. If we weren't brothers, we wouldn't know each other.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Did you sympathise with David Miliband when Ed Miliband beat him to the Labour leadership?
Not in the slightest. I thought that Ed Miliband ought to win. On a simple point, that Fleet Street has never understood this. Because David Miliband would not say the Iraq War was wrong, the Labour Party could not conceivably elect him as leader. The Labour Party had to have a leader who was prepared to say that the Iraq War was wrong at that stage. And I thought all my old instincts about this and my deep loathing of the Iraq War, and also the fact that I've met both of them, and I think Ed Miliband of the two is much the more engaging, made me think that Ed Miliband ought to win. And I always thought that Fleet Street's petulant foot stamping when he lost was because so many political reporters had invested so many lunches in Miliband E. They were really furious that they now didn't have the leader of the Labour Party in their pockets.
Do you ever, at any point in the day, have a tingle of nostalgia, not for the past decades, not for the past of this country, but for your Trotskyist left days?
Oh, it was great fun. There's no question we enjoyed ourselves immensely. It was meat and drink. It was friendship. It was entertainment. It was we had a great time. If I were to deny that or to pretend that it wasn't so, then I'd be lying. I made a resolve long ago to be completely honest about this because it's so dull to lie about it and so dull to conceal it.
You're an open-minded man. Could you ever go back to the left, and could you ever go back to being an agnostic or an atheist?
Well, agnosticism is the default position of the human mind. There isn't any other position you can take if you use only facts and logic. You cannot say for certain that God exists or that God doesn't exist. So the view that God exists, which I now hold, is fundamentally a desire. It turned into faith. That's just as I believe the contrary view that God doesn't exist is also a desire.
Is it now a view?
So obviously, I sit before you as somebody who can say without anybody being able to contradict me, I have changed my mind substantially more than once over major issues in my life. It would be idle of me to pretend that it couldn't happen again, but I hope not, because I think the bleakness of the godless universe is so terrifying and dispiriting that I'm not quite sure why anyone should want so much for it.
So do you feel lucky to believe in God then? Did you deliberately seek out God as a way of ordering society?
It's just that you keep saying we've got 10 minutes to go. This necessitates a longer answer. The reasons for my decision to believe in God again after a long period of not doing so are both profoundly personal and deeply, tediously banal. And for both of those reasons, I won't say precisely what they were. What I will say is this: once you have taken a decision, an important decision based upon, and which can only be based upon, the belief that there is justice in the universe and that it applies to you, then once you've asked for justice to apply to you, then you've created in yourself a need to see justice of the same kind everywhere. By asking for, and also by asking for justice for other people, you desire it for yourself. And this immensely complicated dialectic, to use a vaguely Marxist or at least Hegelian expression, begins in the mind, where you feel increasingly impelled by this understanding to see every decision that you take and every action that you take in this light. And I have found that it makes more sense. It's like, in a crude metaphor, it's like those machines that everyone has in their house now, which are supposed to record television programs. If you punch the buttons which appear to achieve this, quite often nothing whatever will happen. If you look at the instruction manual, you will be able to record television programs. I've found it quite practically the case that if you believe that this is a purposeful universe with justice built into it, and eternity therefore unavoidable, and act accordingly, that it responds to your punching of buttons much more meaningfully than if you assume that it's an enormous cosmic car crash in which nothing has any explanation and there is no justice and there is no eternity and that death is the end. Just my experience. So at the moment I can't see any particular reason why I should change my mind, and I've been encouraged greatly by all that I've seen. And I would, again, another metaphor for this and for the immense power of the idea which it's expressed is something which I would urge any of you, whether believers or unbelievers, to go and see, which is the cathedral at Chartres, which stands in the middle of this perfectly normal, quite modern French town as a monument to Christian thought of such immense and timeless power that it almost feels physically as if it is a rock in a river with the present flowing past it at an amazing rate, remaining unchanged. These things, the artistic, the musical, the literary, the poetic, rather than the mathematical, provide not the proofs of it to me, because there are no poetic proofs as there are mathematical proofs, but provide very, very strong arguments for maintaining it. And I think it's the most important discovery I've ever made.
It's a good place to end, and Peter said once to me that he came out of the womb arguing, so I hope you sort of enjoyed being peppered with questions by all of us for the last hour and a half. It's not easy, it's much easier to ask the questions, so I hope you all join me in thanking Peter Hitchens very much for joining us. Please look around, because there's a bar downstairs and lots of interesting people in the room, so it should be quite fun. Thank you very much for coming, and hope to see you again. Should we just go? We'll go this. We'll go around the back quickly. Be careful not to trip on the stairs, because they're quite raised.
They're not safe too much.